Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire is now out playing on Netflix. Alright, so let's just address this first off the bat so we don't have to do it again. Yes, this movie was conceived from a pitch that Snyder brought to Lucasfilm for a Star Wars movie. When they didn't greenlight that, when they didn't buy his pitch, he just decided to go and make his own sci-fi film out of that pitch, and that is how we got Rebel Moon. So when you watch Rebel Moon, there are definitely going to be a lot of times where you're looking at the screen and you go, hey, that looks like Star Wars. And there is a lot of Star Wars in this movie. I mean, there's a full scene in this movie where they basically just took the Katina scene from Star Wars, played it beat for beat, changed a few things here and there, and just plopped it into this movie. So if you've seen Star Wars, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have, this is going to feel like diet Star Wars. But with that said, the way that Snyder takes the Star Wars lore and plays with it in his own little sandbox here, I actually enjoyed quite a bit. When it came to the world building, I thought Snyder had some really interesting creature designs and character designs. The scale and the expansion that this universe has does feel on par with Star Wars. And I found it to be a pretty fun and immersive galaxy to explore for 2 hours. I liked spending time in these worlds that Snyder had created, or built off of the back of Star Wars to be more exact. And on a surface level in that way, I did find that there was a lot of enjoyment to be had in just the visual style of this movie. Now, when it comes to the characters of this movie, I do feel like that's a little bit of a weak spot for the film because I don't feel like these characters are very strong and very developed. And it does have to do with the story, because this story is pretty straightforward, it's pretty simplistic, it's kind of what I would call a pit stop movie. Basically, there's some farmers on this planet that are being harassed by the Imperium, not the Imperials, these guys are called the Imperiums. Can you see what they did there? Okay, the Star Wars references are done now. So let's say that the farmers on this planet are being harassed, just like the grasshoppers harass the ants in A Bug's Life. No, there's actually a lot of A Bug's Life in this movie. So these farmers are being harassed by the Imperium, basically the empire of this universe. So rebels go out to find warriors to come back to this planet and help them fight against this Imperium. And in that way, a lot of the story progression in this is just going to planet, picking up some new characters to come along and fight with us. Which doesn't really lend itself to much character development. It doesn't really lend itself to much characterizations to be explored here, especially when you've got this vast number of characters to develop this group. In that way, I feel like Snyder kind of sacrificed showing for telling, because there is a lot of exposition in this movie to tell us about worlds, about characters, about what's happening in the galaxy at the moment, about this, about that. There's even a whole scene where a character stops and breaks down each character's description to tell you exactly who they are and what their backstory is, because up until this point, the movie hasn't done that for you. And I do think a lot of that is due to the fact that these characters are pretty stereotypical and there's not much that they do to make them unique and stand out from other characters that we've seen in many different sci-fi films. Yes, including Star Wars. It's impossible to ignore. I feel like the only character that kind of gets around that is Ed Skrein as the face of the Imperium officers of the bad guys. He's nothing new in a villain. He's nothing you haven't seen a million times before, but I did find that he was intimidating. He was threatening when he does come around and takes down people who don't give him what he wants. When he doesn't get the information that he wants from these characters he's harassing and intimidating, I was kind of nervous for what was going to happen to the people that were not giving him what he wanted. And I do think that it's important to point out that this is a part one. This is very much played out as a setup movie. This is the first chapter of a full book, and we have a lot more of the book to read. So I do think that there's a lot of time and space to grow and expand upon these characters and execute them better in part two, and potentially I think there's going to be a part three. But as far as this movie goes, they were my biggest struggle to getting into the movie because I just didn't latch on to any of them. Going back to the surface level entertainment that this movie is, I did find that the action sequences in this, I thought they were pretty cool. They were helmed pretty well. Although there is something that happens in these action sequences that I did have a gripe with, and it's one of the staples of Snyder, because Snyder likes to bring us beautiful visuals onto the screen. He also likes to pause on those visuals pretty often by using slow-mo, and usually the slow-mo that Snyder uses in his films doesn't bother me all that much, but in this movie, I felt like his slow-mo was a little bit obnoxious. There are just times in the action sequences in particular where Snyder just goes to the slow-mo a little bit too much. Like, yes, Snyder, it's pretty cool to see a blaster take off in slow motion, but do we have to see it every 15 seconds in this fight? I'm pretty sure there's a fight that happens in this movie that is just full slow-mo. I don't think they went at full speed at any point during the entire fight. And in that way, I actually felt like it took some of the energy and some of the excitement out of the action sequences when they just went so damn slow. And that is another little negative of Rebel Moon, is I do feel like the movie lacked a little bit of energy. I wouldn't go as far to say that the movie was dull or boring, but there were definitely times in the movie where I felt like they needed to ramp up something. They needed to get a spark going to something, because this movie kind of plays out kind of at one pace the entire time. It's kind of one note throughout the entire runtime of the movie, and at 2 hours, that did kind of hurt the pacing a little bit for me. So with all that said, I don't feel like Rebel Moon is a must-see, especially if you've seen many sci-fi films before, and especially if you've seen Star Wars. If you haven't seen Star Wars, this movie's probably going to blow your mind, because it'll be your first time watching Star Wars, and Star Wars is mind-blowing. But as far as a little sci-fi movie dropped on Netflix goes, I actually found this to be pretty entertaining. I liked it. I don't think it's anything special. I don't think it's great, but it's not a bad little film to put on if you have 2 hours to kill and you want to explore some fun sci-fi elements and worlds. So for that reason, as far as Rebel Moon Part 1 goes, we'll see how this changes as Part 2 and Part 3 and we get the full story at the end. But for Part 1, I'm going to give it a weak recommend. Anyway, guys, those are all my thoughts and opinions on Rebel Moon. But what did you guys think of Rebel Moon? Have you had a chance to check it out yet? Comment down below and let me know. I love to hear all your thoughts and opinions about this movie. And if you're new here and you haven't heard, we have a goal on this channel. We want to hit 2,500 subscribers before the end of the year. And we are so close to doing it, guys, but we need your help to get there. So if you like talking about Rebel Moon, if you like talking about Snyder movies, if you just like talking about movies in general, you're in the right place. We do that all the time over on this channel. We would love for you to join us. Consider hitting that subscribe button before you make your way out. As always, guys, thank you so much for hearing me out, and I hope to talk to you guys again real soon.